So a tale of two lenses. This is the Zeiss 15mm 2.8 and this is the new Canon RF 15 to 35mm 2.8. Which one is better? Let's find out. So for years, my go-to ultra-wide-angle lens has been the Zeiss 15mm 2.8 lens. I got this lens for a lot of reasons. I did a review on it. I'll put the video at the end. You can check it out. But it's been one of my favorite lenses to use. And there really hasn't been any other options out there to match it. But now that I've switched to the Canon R system, there is a lens, the Canon RF 15 to 35mm zoom lens, f2.8L. So now I have two lenses to compare, both 15mm, both f2.8 maximum aperture. Which is the better lens? Well, on paper, it's not even a comparison. The Canon 15 to 35 has autofocus, the Zeiss lens does not. The Canon 15 to 35 has image stabilization, the Zeiss does not. The filter diameter on the Canon 15 to 35 is 82mm. On a Zeiss, it's 95, which is big, heavy, and expensive if you want to get filters for this lens. 82 is something that I already have filters for, and they're much less expensive, and you can use them with other lenses. 95 is really unique in that way. Weight-wise, the Zeiss, I gotta say, Zeiss 15mm is heavier, definitely heavier, a lot heavier than the 15 to 35. It's more front-heavy, especially because since I'm using it on the Canon EOS R, I have to use the adapter. So it's definitely more front heavy when I put it onto the camera. This lens feels a lot lighter, is not much nicer in the hand, and it's actually back heavy. You know, most of the weight of this lens is back here in the back by the mount. So it feels great attached to the camera. Size-wise, they're really both about the same, especially when you factor in the adapter. The Canon is a little bit bigger, but really the size is negligible. Size difference is negligible. They're both about the same thing, but Zeiss is heavier, Canon's lighter, and to top it all off, the Zeiss is stuck at 15mm. It's a prime lens. I love using prime lenses, but this is stuck at 15mm. This I can use as a 15mm 2.8 lens compared to the Zeiss, but now I also have this as a zoom lens. I can shoot this at 20 or 24 or 35 and have those other focal lengths in there also. So on paper, it's not even a comparison. This Canon lens far exceeds the Zeiss lens, but on paper really doesn't matter. What it really all comes down to is image quality. So I took these two lenses out over the course of a couple of days. I took a bunch of pictures. I was shooting them together. Some situations just kind of hand-holding and shooting around, some on a tripod, to really compare exactly the performance I was getting out of the old Zeiss lens and the brand new Canon 15 to 35. So let's jump into the computer. I'll go through the images. I'll talk about the different situations, the differences between the two lenses, and maybe we'll see if one is better than the other. So I wanted to test out a few things specifically, but first let me show you, there's a difference in perspective here between, this is the Canon 15 to 35 and this is the Zeiss 15. Both shot from the exact same spot on a tripod. I imagine it has something to do with the Zeiss being used with an adapter for the EF to RF mount, but there is a different perspective here between the two. I could get the same perspective on the Zeiss 15 if I just moved it a little bit, so that's not a big deal, but I just wanted to point that out. So first I wanted to check the distortion and the vignette. Now, anytime you have an ultra-wide lens like this, there's going to be a little bit of distortion, and there's probably also going to be some vignette. So this is right out of the camera with the Zeiss 15 at f2.8. This is the same shot at f8, so you can see basically the distortion is exactly the same, but you lose some of the vignette. That pretty much goes away at f8. It looks very nice. And then this is the 15 to 35 at 2.8 and the 15 to 35 at f8. So let me just compare them right next to each other. You can see the Zeiss 15 at 2.8 versus the 15 to 35 at 2.8. 15 to 35 is a little bit more distortion, and at 2.8 vignette is just about the same. So you can see that's the 15 to 35. I'll go back to the Zeiss. You can see the lines are a little bit straighter there. The lines are a little bit curved in the middle on the 15 to 35. Vignette is about the same. When I stop down to f8, here's the Zeiss at f8. Here's the 15 to 35 at f8. Again, the 15 to 35 has more distortion, definitely, And at f8, the 15-35 definitely has more vignette. With the Zeiss, it's pretty much gone, but with the 15-35, there's still some vignette in there. Now, I'm not really worried about any of these things at all because distortion and vignette is very easily correctable in Lightroom. So here's the Zeiss 15 at 2.8, and if I just make a few minor corrections in Lightroom, I get this. So here's the Zeiss 15 at 2.8, corrected for vignette and distortion. Here it is at f8, pretty much the exact same picture. Here's the 15-35 corrected at 2.8, and here's the 15-35 corrected at f8. So now compare them. Here's the 15 at 2.8. Here's the 15-35 at 2.8. Other than the lighting being off just a little bit between the two shots, they're basically very, very similar as far as the vignette and the distortion goes. And at f8, here's the Zeiss at f8, and here is the 15-35 at f8. Again, very, very similar as far as vignette and distortion. To me, that's not really much of a big deal. The distortion, like I said, is very easily correctable in Lightroom. There's even presets in Lightroom for each of these lenses that automatically corrects supposedly for whatever little bit of distortion and vignette there is. So that's just 1 or 2 clicks, fixes that up right away. So then I want to take a look at the bokeh, the out of focus areas on the Zeiss 15 and on the 15-35, basically the same thing. You're getting a nice smooth out of focus area. Zeiss is on the left, Canon 15 is on the right. Basically the same thing. So no real difference there. And the colors, as you can see, these are right out of the camera, are fairly similar between the two. There really is no difference. You can see the bluish color on the house here, and the orangey yellow colors. There's some greens and browns in there. Everything looks very similar. So let's take a look at some more color, and we'll take a look at the sharpness. So this is the 15-35 at f2.8, and this is the Zeiss 15 at f2.8. Color-wise, they basically look exactly the same. Contrast, everything is very, very similar between these two lenses, but let's dig in close and look at the sharpness. So these are at f2.8, the Zeiss on the left, the Canon on the right. You can see color-wise, everything looks pretty similar. These are both on a tripod from the same spot. Zeiss on the left, Canon on the right. You can see the Canon looks a little bit sharper right in the center there. Let's look in the corners, and you can see a real difference in the corner sharpness between the Zeiss on the left and the Canon on the right. This is pretty great on the right hand side here. You can see how sharp this is all the way in the corner. Let's check the other side. See what a difference between the two sides. The Canon 15 is much sharper in the corners than the Zeiss. But that's a 2.8. Let's check it at f8. Okay, here we're stopped down to f8. The Zeiss on the left, Canon on the right. And you can see they're almost identical right in the center. Very nice and sharp, nice contrast. Maybe a slight edge to the Canon right in the middle there. Very, very similar. But let's check those corners. Again, even at f8, stop down to f8, the Zeiss is still a little bit soft all the way up here in the corners. And look how sharp on the right-hand side the Canon 15mm zoom lens is all the way in the extreme corners. Let's check another corner. You can see what a difference. Zeiss on the left, Canon on the right. Much sharper, even at f8, the Canon's much sharper. So what does that mean? If you're shooting ultra-wide landscapes and you need the absolute extreme in sharpness from corner to corner at every edge, you can't beat the Canon. This 15-35 is exceptionally sharp all the way across. Colors and contrast both very similar. Distortion, like I said before, is a little bit better on the Zeiss, noticeably better on the Zeiss, but that's something that's correctable in Lightroom. Sharpness is not correctable in Lightroom. So all things being said, these two lenses are almost the same in every regard, except sharpness, where the Canon 15-35 gets the edge. And given all the other features that the Canon has, autofocus, image stabilization, and the ability to zoom from 15mm to 35mm, it might just be the better lens. So that's very interesting. I never want to compromise on quality. Even if I have to give up a lot of features like image stabilization and autofocus and size and weight, I've never been one to give up quality over convenience, which is why I have a lens like the Zeiss. I've been using it all these years. But now I have a choice to make. Is this good enough? Is this, as a 15mm 2.8 lens, good enough to outperform the Zeiss lens? Well, based on what we just looked at before, I gotta say it's pretty close. And any little differences, some distortion and things like that really can be easily adjusted in the computer afterwards. So I haven't made my mind up yet. I would love to hear If you've used this lens, the 15 to 35 as a 15 at ultra wide, what kind of performance you've gotten out of it, how much you like it, or if there's any limitations that you found in it that you don't like, put them in the comments below. Especially if you've used the lens like this, like the Zeiss in the past, and you can kind of compare them also. Tell me what you think. I still have a lot of shooting to do with this. I really want to get more comfortable with it, and we'll see. If I really find that it doesn't make a difference image quality wise, using the 15 to 35 compared to the Zeiss 15, it might be time to make a switch. Like I said, I love shooting primes. The fact that they're both maximum aperture 2.8 kind of equalizes things a lot. If this Zeiss 15 was a 2.0, it wouldn't even be a question for me. I'd still be using the Zeiss because I really love having the extra wide aperture, the shallow depth of field, things like that. But on paper, statistically, focal length and maximum aperture, they're the same. But like I said before, the features of this 15 to 35 far outweigh the features of this, fairly simple Zeiss Prime. So I have some decisions to make. I'm going to put links here to videos. Like I said before, I'm going to put the video that I did reviewing the Zeiss 15mm, one of my favorite lenses of all time, and I'll put a link here to the series of videos that we've done on the Canon R system. So check those out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.